What up, guys, and welcome back to the Library of Alexandria. So today's video is going to be a book haul because over the last couple of months in June and July I have acquired slowly a bunch of new books. Before I really started this booktube channel, I had a lot of books that I had already read, like my books that I had throughout the years, but in the last couple months I've acquired a bunch of new ones, mostly by searching on Goodreads or Amazon for political/military fantasy, because that's the kind of stuff that I like the best. And so I have the first book of a ton of new acquisitions. So I'm not going to spend an inordinate amount of time on each one of them because I think there's like 20-something of them and I don't want this video to be an hour. So I'm just going to show you what it is, what I've heard about it, what I think it's about, and you can tell me in the comments whether or not it's good or if I should prioritize putting something on the TBR if you've read it. A lot of these are not super popular, I don't think. I haven't really seen a bunch of people talking about them, probably because none of them are really new. And so if they were talked about, they were talked about prior to now. So regardless, I just haven't heard a bunch about them on BookTube, so I will be going into most of these blind. I've kind of perused the star rating and a couple of reviews for a few of them on Goodreads, but Goodreads is notoriously inaccurate in what it thinks about some of the books. Goodreads thinks that Toll the Hounds is one of the highest rated Malazan books, and that is just not correct. So, without further ado, I will go ahead and start this with Boom, The Crippled God. I got this book because I'm finishing Malazan Book of the Fallen in August. I am currently reading Book 9, Dust to Dreams. I am reading this book, Book 10, Crippled God. I'm reading it in August. I may take a break between, or I may just plow straight through so that I can finally be free of my Malazan overlords. The Crippled God, the cover looks really cool, and it's with characters that I like, so I'm hoping that this will be good, but, you know, who knows. Next, we have His Majesty's Dragon, which is Temeraire, Book 1. I think Temeraire is the name of the dragon in this. This book is the Napoleonic Wars with dragons. And Britain and France have dragons to help in the war. That's awesome. I love the Napoleonic Wars just in general. I read the historical fiction books, the Sharp series by Bernard Cornwell, so this is right up my alley. I don't normally really like reading about dragons, despite growing up playing Dungeons and Dragons for forever. Dragons just seem like they were like the assassins before assassins became assassins. Just everyone used dragons back when I read things, probably because I read a bunch of Forgotten Realms books and Dragonlance, but I just like to play it out on dragons. But if dragons are done cool or done well, then it might be awesome. Plus, Napoleonic Wars, so we'll see. This is by Naomi Novik, by the way. Sorry, I didn't say who wrote this. I'll fix that in the subsequent books. Next, we have The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams. This is the first book in the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy. From what I know about the series, it's pretty classic fantasy written in the 80s, early 90s. And so I'm not the biggest fan of like really classical fantasy with like, you know, elves and dwarves and just kind of a predictable place that the story's going. But from what I understand, this is not actually as archetypal and predictable as it would initially appear. And Tad Williams apparently is the inspiration for a lot of fantasy authors that I currently like, so I wanted to read it and see what all the fuss was about. I know he's still publishing novels in this world, but this is kind of the original trilogy of this world. So I'm going to give it a go. If I don't like this first one, I won't continue with the series. But if this is good, I hear it's really slow, especially the first half of the book, because the dude's name is Simon, and I think he's a pig wrestler, or like a pig. I think he just takes care of pigs, I think. Hold on. Simon Mooncalf. I don't know what he does. I'm going with pigs, so pigs. I've got a few sci-fi books in here, and this one is Offarmageddon Reef by David Weber, and this is the first book in the Safehold series. This is a series apparently about a civilization that was kind of big cropshed by this alien race and is kind of kept in submission. They're like some kind of vassal state to the alien race, and they're kind of left alone, but they've been like, their civilization has been like devolved, essentially. And if they ever develop technology again, that evil race, it's called something, the the Gababa. The Gababa will, like, know that they have technology and come back and, you know, big cromps them again. And so I'm excited to read this because it sounds really cool. I don't really like that apparently there's a guy named Merlin. There's a dude who takes on the name Merlin who has technology. That could be weird. But I do want to read this, and it's part of a series. I think there's like 6 books or something, so we'll see. And I've been longing for a good sci-fi. Next, Prince of Fools by Mark Lawrence. Mark Lawrence I've heard talked about a lot, mostly his Ancestors series, because that's what most recently came out. I've heard a lot of bad things about Prince of Thorns, but this one seemed pretty innocuous. I read the back, and it looked cool. Again, it looks like there's a war. I read like the first page. It is in first person, which isn't my favorite thing, but it is humorous. The narration is humorous in the way that I can see people actually talking, so I do like that. I've never read a Mark Lawrence book, so this is going to be my first one, and I'm hoping it lives up to the hype. It's the first book of the Red Queen's War, I think. Anyway, it's a book about war, and there's something called the Silent Sister, which I think is just this demon that nobody can see that just, like, wrecks the battlefield. We'll see. I don't know what it's about, but it's small, should be an easy read. We'll see. Next on the list, we have Stormfront by Jim Butcher. This is the first book in the Dresden Files. I read this book, Stormfront, a long time ago. I must have been in college, early college. I don't remember what it was about this book, but something about this book made me not like it enough to continue the series, which is weird because I was all about really long series at the time. I'm just going to wave this book around as kind of a prop. But I'm going to give it another try because the premise is cool. You know, he's a wizard that does detecting in Chicago for other, you know, magical things that have happened. So that's cool. I like Private Detective. I like kind of the noir feel of it. It is first person, which, again, it's fine. I have heard from other booktubers and reviewers that this one and the second one are the worst ones, so maybe I might plow through to the third one and then see if I still like it. Otherwise, I may discontinue it. But I'm going to give Stormfront another go. Now, a note on Stormfront. There is no reason. Let us look. Prince of Fools is a normal-sized paperback. This is not trade paperback. It is not one of those big floppy paperbacks that is in lieu of a hardback book. It's also not the size of the Orbit books that have their weird, non-standard size. It's just a really tall paperback. Why? Why is this the way it is? You can no longer stack things if this is on your bookshelf because, look, if I stack these two together, I can no longer stack a book here, like on its side, because it'll do like that. Why? Who published this? Rock Fantasy? Why? Why? Books should not be this size. Like this, or commit to a hardback. Next is The Red Wolf Conspiracy by Robert V.S. Redick. I've not heard anything. I've never heard of this book before I did my Google search. This is a book about a huge imperial merchant ship that's like 600 years old. I love merchant stuff. I love trade negotiations. I like political fantasy. And this merchant ship is apparently negotiating a treaty between two warring nations, and war ensues. So I also really like the idea of flagships. I like it when empires or countries have these massive floating fortresses that kind of the Persians had, or Nero had these two Nemi ships that were just like these big pleasure barges. And what was one of the other emperors? One of the other emperors had this massive floating like war frigate long before, you know, we had modern day battleships and stuff. So the kind of old-timey, huge, like, live-on imperial ships really kind of appeals to me. So I don't know if this is going to be good or not. It's the book one of, I don't know, The Red Wolf Conspiracy. I think there's like 5 books in this, but we'll see. I just want to read about the merchant ship. What? This one is used. Some books have to get used because Amazon does not have them. I would shop more used if we had a used bookstore around here, but we're in a small town that hates reading because, I don't know, words. So we have one bookstore and it's Books A Million. The selection is not great. We have 0 used bookstores. I mean, there's Goodwill, but there's rarely any kind of fantasy in Goodwill. So that is what that is. This is called Mage's Blood, which is the first book in the Moontide Quartet. I bought this book because it is about a bridge that disappears underwater and reappears when the tides go out every 12 years. and one empire on one side of the bridge wants to big cromch the one on the other side of the bridge, and that just sounded like a cool concept. I don't know what this book is about other than that it's hefty. I have seen a couple people who have read it, or at least it's on their shelves, so I don't know if it's good, but we will see. Next is Bloodsong by Anthony Ryan, book 1 of Something About Ravens, a Raven Shadow novel. This just seems, it's about war, about noble kid who gets left off at the Order. It's probably going to be a school/academy type thing. And then there's war, I guess, with some political intrigue thrown in. I know very little about this, and the back doesn't really elucidate things for me. In fact, it seems pretty kind of generic, not in like a bad way, but just a pretty like standard, you know, there's the Order that the kid grew up in, and then revenge. But this book has stupid good ratings on Goodreads. So that is really why I picked it up, because everyone seems to love this book that reviewed it on Goodreads. So we'll see if it actually lives up to that hype or not, because this is the one I know, like, probably the least about what I'm in store for of all of these books that I'm going to talk about, because we're not even halfway done, y'all, but I promise, tearing down this pile. The Jackal of Gnar by John Marco. Again, another book that I've never heard anybody talking about, but it is about war and politicking, and I think it's a choice between, I think the prince has to decide between like the emperor and his love interest or whatever. And there's two kingdoms fighting and magic and war machines. War machines. Yes. I love war machines. But I picked this one up because reading some of the reviews, people say the villain is really, really good. And I am a sucker for good villains because there really are so few really, really intricate and interesting and well-crafted villains, at least in the books that I've read. Evil overlords are fine, but I've just heard really good things about the villain in here, and so I'm hoping we get like a three-dimensional, you know, despicable villain up in this beast. The Grim Company by Luke Scull. So this is about a mercenary company, which I like the Black Company. This is the Grim Company, so they're a mercenary company. The back seems pretty general, just, you know, wacky guys there. The blurb here says it's gritty. I glanced at the first couple pages, and I'm hoping that that's not kind of indicative of what kind of gritty stuff I'm in store for. Gritty is more than them just swearing a ton and having really creative and vile expressions for getting it on, or just really gross stuff. It takes more than that to be gritty, or at least be well written. I mean, teenagers can write stuff that is just gross for the sake of being gross and explicit for the sake of being explicit. That doesn't translate into quite the gritty realism that a lot of authors seem to think it does. I'm hoping that the page that I read is not indicative of the rest of this, and that there's actually some kind of story to back that up. I can forgive a lot if the plot's good and the characters are interesting. So we'll see. If you've read this book, let me know. Is this an interesting book, or is it just like the Grim Company generic military band? This is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. There's not one person watching this who does not know what this book is, so it's the first book of really the Mistborn trilogy. I guess this is called The Final Empire, but I guess they got tired of people just saying, yeah, I'm reading Mistborn. So this book does not look like it's 650 pages, but it is. So I don't know what kind of paper they're using in this. But I want to read Brandon Sanderson. Guys, I've never read Brandon Sanderson. No, God! And I know that is tragic because everyone is talking about him all the time, and I feel so left out. I'm like the kid who has asthma, and so his mom won't let him play dodgeball with everybody else at PE. And if you were like me, dodgeball was the only thing fun at PE. You know, maybe Foursquare, but I was not good at basketball, as if any of you were like, man, you know what? I wonder why he does BookTube instead of having a pro NBA career. Just in case you're wondering. Boom! Empire of Black and Gold. It's actually Empire in Black and Gold. This is by Adrian Tchaikovsky, who did not, in fact, write Swan Lake. So I have seen a bunch of people reading one of his newer books, Children of Time. But before that, he wrote this series called Shadows of the App, which is a 10-book series. What is my problem with 10-book series about war? The story about this book is that it cannot be found. I had to scour the internet to find a copy for less than, $50. Apparently it's just not published over here. It's all over in England, and there's like 4 different covers, and so if I'm gonna read this whole series, I'm not gonna have any kind of matching cover. Which is fine, because it looks cool. It's about empires warring, which I'm fine with. And apparently there's insect races in this. The bad guys, I think, are just wasps. I think they're like insect people or mantis people or something. Very similar to, I think, the Moranth from the Malazan books. But I think there's other like insect races. And I heard that there's like a race of spiders in another one of his books. I don't know what his obsession is with insect races. Maybe he's an entomologist, which is fine. That would be cool. I hope entomologist is right. Yeah, entomologist is bugs. So anyway, I like books about war. So, empires clashing with bug races. What's not to love? I will say something about the UK binding in this. This is kind of like the floppy... I don't know, this is the binding I expect from like YA books, where like you can't leave it open. It's just halfway between one of those big floppy, huge floppy paperbacks and a mass market paperback. It's just a weird size and an uncomfortable binding. Like, this really feels like a Percy Jackson book that I've taken up from one of my students before. Next we have The Mechanical by Iain Trellis. No. Next we have The Mechanical by Iain Tregillis. So this is book 1 of the Alchemy Wars, and I bought this book on premise alone. It's the 1900s, and the Dutch control the world because they developed these things called clackers, which are these clockwork/cyborg soldiers that none of the other nations could stand against. And that includes the French papists, because the Dutch are Calvinists. So, suck on that, the Pope. That just seems awesome. The Dutch use clockwork soldiers to take over the world? What? What? So I'll be reading this pretty soon. Next we have Priest of Bones by Peter McLean. This is a book about a priest named Tomas. He's an army priest named Tomas Piety. That comes home and his like gang has been like taken over by his brother, I think. I think it's like a gang war book. Like Mark Lawrence over here compares it with The Godfather. So it's, I guess, a gang war book with magic. Like The Godfather meets Gangs of New York meets wizards. Who knows? I haven't heard anything about this book, but I will read it. The character descriptions in the very front are funny. They are not written from like an omniscient, objective narrative perspective, but instead it seems like it's written from the purpose of the main characters. So I think the main character, Tomas, is writing the character descriptions himself, because he uses some choice words to call some of the people who he does not like. So that was kind of funny. The Guns Above. This is a steampunk novel. And this lady right here, Josephine, it is Josephine, right? It's not Josephine, Josette. She is the world's first airship captain, She is the world's first female airship captain, and that just seemed cool. I think it's just gonna be like a high-flying steampunk adventure with airships. Funny story about this, I don't like hardcover, and I think this book only is in hardcover, so when I was buying it off of eBay, I saw one that was like, oh, paperback, I haven't seen that, so I bought it, not paying careful enough attention that this is in fact an uncorrected advanced reading copy, not for sale. On the back, it says uncorrected proof, so this may be riddled with typos and errors, but then it's got the marketing plan on how Tor Publicity is going to market it. But the creme de la creme, the pièce de résistance, is the fact where there should be maps of the airship plans, where you can see the layout of the airship. Instead, illustration 1 and illustration 2. So I had to go to Amazon and look at the preview to where you can look at the first few pages to actually see what the airship looks like. But I think this will be fun. I'm going to read this pretty soon. It's short, normal book length. And I love airships, and I love steampunk. So, I mean, how can it go wrong, really? I don't actually expect this to be fantastic. I think it'll probably just be pretty good. And that's better than... That's better than something sucking, like Return of the Crimson Guard. Red Rising, finally a book people talk about all the time, though not this one. I think they're like 5 books in, so talk about that one. But Pierce Brown and the Red Rising. Now, I have a sneaking suspicion that I purchased a YA novel, because on the back it talks about Hunger Games, and I did do a Google search to see if this was YA, and I couldn't find anywhere that says it is, but when I opened it and read it, it is not only in first person, it is also in the present tense. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think isn't that kind of a YA staple, first person, present tense? That's not really my thing. Tell me if this is YA. I've heard people talking really good about this. I think this is a really, really good series, and I'm gonna read it. I bought the book, so I'm gonna read it. But I don't know. I just have a sneaking suspicion that it is not what I think it is. But space and space politics and space houses based on colors. The golds are the best, followed by the silvers. And I guess red is right down at the bottom. Like, where's Blue House? Have y'all read this? Is Blue House somewhere? Can y'all tell me, is Blue good? Because that's the house I would want to be in, Blue House. Tell me if Blue sucks. All right, this is The Folding Knife by K.J. Parker. I have never heard anybody mention this book. I didn't even know this book existed, but I came across it as kind of a political fantasy book. And you know those books where you read the back or you read like a review and it seems like the book was specifically tailored to you and your interests and maybe no one else in the world? That is this right here. This is definitely going to be on my August TBR because I read a review on Reddit that describes pretty much everything that I would really want in a novel that I would love. First of all, the world it takes place in is a cross between ancient Rome and the Renaissance Italy, which was run by those not trading houses, but those merchant families like the Medici. And the main character, whose name is Bassianus Severus, hold on, I'll come to that in a second because that kind of stuck in my head, but they call him Basso, is kind of like this genius, has risen to prominence, and he makes one mistake and kind of all of that kind of collapses in on him. And so I think it's about his ruination and how he gets out of it or how he stays ahead of everything. I love these books that have brilliant protagonists and not just we're told that they're brilliant, but we're shown how smart they are and how ahead of everyone else they stay just using their wits alone. Now right here, you cannot see it, but up here on the cover in the top left corner, I did not see it till the book came in, there is a picture of the Emperor Karakala, which as soon as I saw that, I went and did a quick Google search just to refresh my memory, whose name was Bassianus Severus, because he's one of the sons of Septimius Severus. So this character is based, or has to be based, on Karakala, who I don't know how he's brilliant, because Karakala was not brilliant. He was a brute. He's like if you crossed Buzz from Home Alone with Biff from Back to the Future. He's just a thug that was the biggest Alexander the Great fanboy and probably had posters up of Alexander the Great in his room and always wanted to, go see him in concert and missed school to go see Alexander the Great in whatever the equivalent of concert was. So I am really excited to read this book. I love watching brilliant men and I like watching their downfall. So I will let you know if this book is good, and then I'll be the only one in the history of the world who has read it. Down to the last 4, I've got Consider Phlebas by Iain M. Banks. This is one of the first book in the culture books by Iain M. Banks that I've heard a lot of really good things about. I have not heard the best about this book. A lot of people say that get past this book and then the second book is just worlds better. And from what I've read, it's because this book takes place outside this society called the culture. The culture is fighting for its right to exist, and the culture, from what I understand, is this society that is run by hyper-intelligent AIs that have kind of removed the need for humankind to really do anything, so humans can just kind of live their best life and do whatever they want because they don't have to tend to any of their needs anymore because the AI is doing that. And there's this other society that hates them and is trying to destroy them. And this book, apparently, the hero is from the other society, not from the culture, while the other culture books are from within the culture. So I think that's why people say this one isn't as good as those other ones, but it sounds super interesting, And so I'm going to read this, but people on my Instagram did not vote for this one, so we'll be reading Hyperion first, but I'll probably read this one in September. I've talked about this one in one of my other videos, in like a TBR video. I don't know when I did. Oh, when I'm talking about my bookshelf. This is Promise of Blood, or Promise of Blod, as my buddy Finn would say, by Brian McLean. It's muskets and it's magic. And this guy looks like Joel from Last of Us. I want to read this. I just have to find a place to slot it in. This is the Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham. This is one of the guys who wrote the Expanse series. There's two guys who have some pseudonym that they write under for the Expanse series. I just finished the first book of this. This is an omnibus edition. For those of you who want a Latin lesson, omnibus is the dative or ablative case form of the word omnis, which means all or every. The first book was great. I'm filming a review for the first book right after this. It's just really good, but really different, so it's not for everybody. It was cheaper to just buy the omnibus than it was to buy them separately, but this is a book that is heavily, heavily political intrigue. There is not a ton of action in the first book at all, but it is very heavy on politics and, politicking, really, and it's just really good. The second book takes place 14 years later than the first one, so we'll see where that goes. But I'm excited. I will definitely read the second book next month. And then finally, because everyone's talking about it and because my friends are watching the TV show, this is the first book of the Expanse series that I just mentioned, of which Daniel Abraham is... the author's name is up here, not down here where it usually is. Of which James S.A. Corey, he's one of the people in James S.A. Corey. This is Leviathan Wakes. This, again, I'm so excited to have a book that people are currently talking about or have talked about recently. The problem is I won't get around to reading this very soon, but it's like a mystery in space. There's like a detective in space. That sounds awesome. I love detective books. There's also some horror in this. That sounds awesome as well. I love space operas. Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3 until the last 5 minutes are an amazing series. Sorry. I'm excited to finally get around to reading that. So, guys, that is my book haul, those massive amounts of books. If you've read any of these, please tell me what you thought of them. Tell me which ones that I should prioritize reading and which ones you did not enjoy at all. I'm hoping that some of you watching will have read at least some of them. I know you guys like Mistborn, guys. I know. So ones that besides Mistborn. So anyway, just tell me in the comments if you've heard of any of these books or if you've read any of these books, and I will see you guys next time. And as always, thanks for watching.